He is considered a romantic intellectual of the 19th century, whose fate is full of dramatic and contrasting turns. He was a bastard, the son of a landowner and his serf girl. The author of a master's thesis burned by the order of the imperial ministry. One of the founders of the first Ukrainian secret political organization. The arrest and imprisonment in the Peter and Paul fortress and political exile mutilated the later life of Mykola Kostomarov. His marriage to former student Alina Kragelska was severed and his poetic creativity was then forbidden. Perhaps this distracted the neophyte poet from engaging in further literary work and directed his efforts towards science, mostly historical. He became a historian artist and the creator of historical works, which are still read and considered today to be very exciting novels. He mercilessly destroyed the Russian pantheon of historical heroes by introducing new names into it. You can write both a poem and an adventure novel about Mykola Kostomarov. The plot is his dramatic life, and everything that Mykola Kostomarov wrote, including his historical works, poetry, a collection of commentaries and documentary materials, would be enough material for an entire generation of researchers. And not in vain, the outstanding historian Mikhailo Grushevsky said that the work of Kostomarov left its mark for the entire epoch of the 19th century. He was a historian, a philosopher, an ethnographer, and a writer at the same time. So I think that his achievements, which he made during his short life, he lived 67 years, complement both Ukrainian ethnology, history, philosophy, and political thought. Of course, he was the forerunner of many Ukrainian historians, both Grushevsky and the subsequent Ukrainian historical school. The future classic of Ukrainian historical science, an outstanding ethnographer, talented writer and publicist, was born in the spring of 1817 in the Voronezh province. His ancestors relocated here in Slobozhanщina in the 17th century. It was after the victory of the army of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth over the army of Bogdan Khmelnytsky near the town of Berestechko. The boy's childhood was replete with hardships because he was an illegitimate son of a serf and his father tragically died before he could adopt him. When the mother was freed from serfdom, she gave Mykola to study at the Voronezh Gymnasium. In 1833, he entered the History and Philology department of the Kharkiv University. By the way, he was the only graduate of this gymnasium who entered university, where he continued his studies. While studying at the Kharkiv University, he became interested in folklore and the Cossack past of Ukraine. This interest increased during Kostomarov's service as a junker in the Kinburn Dragoon Regiment after graduating from the university. This cavalry unit of the Russian Imperial Army was based in Ostrorsk, which was founded by Ukrainian Cossacks in Slobozhanщina and where rich archives were preserved. It was precisely then when Kostomarov understood that history should be studied not only in archives, but also in folk art. Kostomarov was one of the first historians who conducted ethnographic expeditions in his native Slobozhanщina. He believed that it was not enough to study history only from the annals. One must also study folklore directly, communicating directly with representatives of one or another ethnos, drawing directly from them some valuable knowledge of genuine history. In the poetic and dramatic works of that time, Kostomarov praised the princely and Cossack times of Ukraine and decided to continue his scientific career. In 1840, he passed his master's degree exams and began working on his thesis. Its theme was also connected with the history of the Ukrainian people. It was dedicated to the Brest Union of 1596 and the creation of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. However, the defense of his thesis was cancelled for purely political reasons. In fact, then the Russian clergy and the authorities were one. That is why Kostomarov's work was forbidden. It was considered anti-state, anti-Russian propaganda. According to the official version, Moscow, as the Third Rome, assumed the laurels of Constantinople and became the defender of orthodoxy among the Slavs. Kostomarov not so much denied it. He simply expressed the alternative view that there was a Uniate or a Greek Catholic Church, which also has the right to be called the successor of Constantinople.
Ця дисертація була видана їм у вигляді книжки.
He published his thesis as a book in 100 copies. It was distributed among his friends and those who were interested in this history.
Тогочасні церковні власті, зокрема і очільника.
It is clear that the church authorities were not satisfied with it. In particular, the head of the Kharkov diocese Innocenty, who appealed for help to secular authorities. And in the end, the Minister of Education, Count Sergei Uvarov, instructed Professor Ustryalov to give an assessment of this work.
Ця рецензія була підготовлена розгромна. Зрозуміло, що після цього оцей
This review was devastating. It is clear that after that the historical and political pamphlet, as Grushevsky called it, could not be defended, and Kostomarov was even ordered to collect back all published books of this monograph and burn them.
у вигляді цієї монографії і спалив їх.
Києво-Мефодіївські братчики.
The Cyril and Methodius community wrote and built up romantic projections about the messianic mission of the Ukrainian people in the territory of the Slavs.
Спроби організувати загальнослав'янську єдність.
These were attempts to organize Slavonic unity, but to organize it not on the principles of some new monarchy or pan-Slavism, but on the principles of democracy with a president as the leader and parliament. In March 1847, after a denunciation of one of the students, the activities of the society were exposed and its members were arrested. The arrest occurred at a rather unfavorable time for Mykola Kostomarov. He had planned to get married in a few days, and this arrest turned his life totally upside down. Accused of a state crime, Kostomarov was imprisoned for a year in the Peter and Paul fortress, and then for a long 9 years was exiled to Saratov. There he was appointed as a translator in the provincial chancery, but there was nothing to translate, so he was assigned to work in a secret department, which dealt with the affairs of the schismatics. There he first came across a huge layer of these materials, and then his famous book about Stepan Razin appeared. Later it was outlined by Karl Marx and the Russian Tsar Alexander II. It became a genuine literary bestseller. It was after Tsar Alexander II came to power in 1856 that Kostomarov was formally freed from political supervision, a ban on printing scientific and artistic works, and a ban on teaching in educational institutions. He then moved to St. Petersburg and became a professor at the Department of Russian History of the St. Petersburg University. After he was invited to lecture as an associate professor at the St. Petersburg University, this was a really great event. After his lectures, he was even carried out in the arms of the students, put in a carriage in front of the main university building. It was a truly unusual event of intellectual influence in those times.
Це новий ракурс російської історії, тому ж самому питання про зародження.
This was a new angle on Russian history. For example, this was the birth of Russian statehood. The fact is that not all among the Russian elite agreed to the official paradigm. Then many alternative views on Russian history, the birth of ancient Rus statehood, the history of the princedom of Muscovy in general, the era of the reign of Tsar Peter the Great and the establishment of the Russian Empire were born. How did this transpire and in what way? Kostomarov really had his own special view of historical science. Unlike most of the Russian professors, he did not consider the state life to be the essence of the historical process. so he had a fairly critical view of the events and the main figures in both Russian and Ukrainian history, which was contrary to the public beliefs and opinion in those years. He was one of the first to lay the foundations of scientific historiography. At the same time, he tried to introduce a new approach to the study of the historical past. Previously, it was a history of states led by dynasties, but then he undertook the study of the people. In addition, he gave this process of history a popular character. His lectures drew attention to him primarily with these new approaches and a brilliant literary way of submitting this material.
Привертали до нього увагу насамперед оціми новими підходами, цією такою манерою літературно-блискучою подавати оцей матеріал.
Besides that, he drew attention to such an element as the critical comprehension of historical biographies. In fact, his most popular research book is about the history of eminent personalities of the Russian Empire, including, of course, those Ukrainian lands that were then an integral part of the Russian Empire.
Українські, які входили до складу Росії.
Indeed, his fundamental work, Russian History and Biographies of its most important figures, was of particular interest, where critical biographies of the main heroes of ancient Rus, Ukrainian and Russian history were presented. The author radically expressed his opinion about a number of prolific Russian idols.
Усталені офіційні теорії, даючи об'єктивні характеристики таким
Denying the established official theories and giving objective characteristics to such iconic persons of imperial history, for example, he simply named Ivan IV, known as Grozny, Ivan the Terrible, a coward.
подвиг Івана Сусаніна.
Then he documentarily denied the idea of the deed of Ivan Susanin. This was one of the foundations of the legend of the Romanov dynasty. Imperial historiography did not spare and did not understand Mykola Kostomarov. First of all, they were not satisfied with his historical truth, which he tried to express, relying on documents. Perfectly knowing world history and the history of Kievan Rus, Mykola Kostomarov boldly started a public debate with the supporter of the official Norman theory of the origin of Rus, the Russian historian Mikhail Pogodin. This scientific duel was held on March 19, 1860, in front of a large audience of the St. Petersburg University, in the presence of a considerable number of students, scientists, and high-standing government officials.
Його запросили на княжіння в Новгород.
Norman theory. The essence of it is that Rurik was a Varangian. He was invited to reign Novgorod by Slovens, and in fact statehood came from there. Russian scholars and historians, I think, to some extent, even with a certain level of politicking, claim that it was from there that Russian statehood came, not from Kiev, from Kuyavia, an ancient state centered in Kiev. Kostomarov defended another point of view about the fact that the Normans were not the first to create the state here in Rus. Kostomarov had his own point of view, both on the origin of ancient Rus and on the origin of Russians and Ukrainians. He believed that these were two completely different peoples. In 1861, Kostomarov put forward his famous formula, two Russian nationalities, in the work Osnova Foundation in St. Petersburg. In it, he noted the striking cultural and psychological differences between Russians and Ukrainians. Within a certain historical era, Kostomarov was quite distant from the notion of an independent Ukraine. But he stated convincingly the fact that the Russians and Ukrainians had two different pasts. In 1873, separated by fate for many years, Mykola Kostomarov and his former bride, Alina Kragelska, already a widow and mother of three, met again. Soon after, they were married and lived for 10 years until the death of Kostomarov. The fate of Kostomarov was typical for talented Ukrainians of the 19th century. Like all of them, Kostomarov had to work in the institutions of the Russian Empire. He was persecuted by the official authorities for his national patriotic views. Be that as it may, with his tireless work he paved the way for the next generations of Ukrainian writers and scholars.